we live?
We are.
Oh, are we live on? We're live on Instagram,
Yes.
but not on Facebook. Oh, there I is. What's going on, guys? It's Throw It Out There Thursday, or no? Oh my God, we haven't done this in so long. It is Tech Tuesday, but we're going to be talking about season prep. So right now we're in dune season. It might be mud season for you guys, the East Coast, stuff like that. But we're going to be talking specifically about how and what to look for when you are prepping your car for whatever season you are in. But in order to do that, we got to go over to Justin Smith.
Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. We were talking amongst ourselves before Josh got involved with that camera that it's been a long time. It seems like we've been gone. We've been racing. We were at SEMA show. We had a ton going on. And Josh, you've got some really killer stuff coming for the SEMA show, right?
We do.
Yeah. So you guys are going to get a really cool video on that. If you have never been, it'll feel like you have for the first time once you watch Josh's video. But back to what we're talking about. We had a suggestion from one of our listeners to kind of go over a list of things when you're prepping your car for the season. We mentioned dune season, but really this prep list works for every season. It doesn't matter if it's dunes, like Steve said, mud, or race season. It does not matter. All of this stuff actually works. But there are multiple levels of things that you're going to want to check, because if you're just kind of a play car, relaxed driving kind of style, then there isn't very much you're going to have to check on the car, as opposed to someone who is full send, airing it out, maybe racing. They're going to have to go a lot deeper, take a lot more parts and plastics off the car to check everything. And we're going to kind of cover a list of those from simple to extensive that you're going to want to know. And we're going to show you some stuff. Josh, turn around. You guys are going to get a chance to take a look at raw chassis and what we do when we're prepping, as well as parts on workbenches and everything ripped off of cars, all the way back down to your normal engine oil changes. We'll cover all that. But if you have questions specific, then send them. Both Mitch and Steve are here. They're going to try and cover your stuff. They'll be doing one of these in the back if they got something good, just like that. Mitch loves doing that. Hey! So let's start off with the list. You guys, Josh is going to show you this list. If you guys want, then come back, reverse the video, freeze this for a second so you've got kind of a hit list. I'm going to go over it really quick while Josh is on it, and then we're going to show you each individual part. Engine, I'm going to stay kind of out of that because it's fairly simple. You guys all know changing the oil, changing plugs, changing air filters, fuel filters, the basics when it comes to engine maintenance. It's the same as your car on the street. Just don't have Jiffy Lube do all the stuff on your UTV. But that blanket deal. We're going to go into tires. Make sure you check that stuff for leaks, for plugs. Maybe you have too many plugs in it because you're a plug guy and you throw one in it holds air and you're like, leave it, send it for the next trip.
I love a good plug.
Steve does.
Speaking of plugs, visit our website, shocktherapy.com.
Good one.
Thank you.
Smooth.
That was
awesome. Brakes, brake pads, fluids in general, arms, arm bushings, hardware, hub bearings. Some people call them upright bearings or spindle bearings, ball joints, tie rods, rack and pinions, radius rods, hubs, joints, trailing arms, sway bar, CV axle, boots, clutches, belts, weights, rollers, helix, all kinds of stuff inside the clutch area, and shocks, which are pretty straightforward and have to do with us, 2,500 to 3,500 miles. And then we get into the deep stuff. If you guys want to pull things apart, like all the plastics off your car, we're going to show you some of the parts on the chassis that you're going to want to concentrate on. And these components on the frame are manufacturer not specific. Pretty much all the manufacturers, if you beat on it long enough and beat on it hard enough, are going to have issues in different spots. Steve knows all about beating on it long enough and hard enough.
I do, and if you don't beat it enough, it will fall off.
That's right. That's the theme today. If you guys don't check all this stuff, I guarantee you don't check it, it will fall off. So first, skip the engine stuff. You guys can take it anywhere and get it serviced. Let's go straight into wheels, tires, brakes. Over here on the left, we've got one of our pre-runners, Wildcat XX. It's actually jacked up right now off the ground so that we can show you what we really want you guys to do. First, if you get the tire off the ground, give it a good shake. You're going to go two different directions when it comes to this stuff. Grab the top and the bottom, shake it inward at the top and outward. When you do this, you're going to find either loose hub bearing. If that's something that is worn out, you're going to find that pretty quick. or you're gonna find loose or worn out arm bushings. So Josh, if you can actually see into this area right here, you guys, the bushings are this component right here. That's actually pretty hard. Let me swap spots with you. So we've got a control arm, you got bushings on both sides of it, frame mounts and hardware holding it together. These bushings are pretty common to wear out, so watch this. Can you see that, Josh? That whole upper section moving inside the mount? Look at that move. It's actually loose hardware. So what you're looking for are worn out bushings that could supply some of that looseness. You're looking for hardware that's worn out or hardware that's loose, allowing that to move. Or if the hardware got loose and it moved around enough inside that tab, it can take the hole and wallow it out, allowing that whole thing to move around, and you're never gonna be able to tighten it enough to stop it. So we wanna make sure you guys are looking at that. That's super common to, again, it doesn't matter what manufacturer. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, Steve?
Oh no, you're doing the shake test, and I was wondering if you shake it more than twice, so you're playing with it.
This is what I've heard. Actually, Steve follows me into the bathroom all the time and says that. It's kind of weird. I don't understand what you're doing. But back to bushings. So check all your upper arm bushings, check all the lower arm bushings, check all the hardware that's holding those components to the chassis. Now, when we're done shaking the tire top to bottom, we're gonna go front and back. Grab this tire front and rear and go back and forth as if you're steering it. What you're gonna find by doing this is also control arm bushings, but you're gonna find some steering components. So take a look at this tie rod up in the front. You can see that moving at the boot quite a bit. That's actually a loose rack and pinion that is allowing a lot of that play. And that's common, again, through all manufacturers. You can see that it could be the joint itself. Josh, come to the front. Up here, where the joint attaches to this spindle, right where my finger's at there, this mount, that center portion, you can move this back and forth and find that that's loose. But if that's not moving, you can follow the whole tie rod right up to the rack and pinion, and you can see that that is actually where our problem is on this one. So, you wrap up some of the stuff in the front. Wheel and tire, brakes. While you've got that tire or car up in the air, take the wheels and tires off, take a look at the brake pads, standard issue stuff, same thing you're gonna do on your street car. Make sure the pads aren't worn out, that the brakes, that the rotor isn't worn through. You're gonna check upper control arm bushings, hardware. You're gonna check lower control arm stuff. You're gonna go back and forth, check the rack and pinion. You're gonna check tie rod. You're also gonna check upper and lower ball joint. Now, we don't really have a vehicle here that's got ball joints in it for us to point that out. But on this Honda, Josh, again, if you can come in through the top and look at this upper mount. So this is a factory arm on a Honda, and this piece right here is the top of the ball joint. Underneath, bottom of this nut, that's the bottom of the ball joint. Inside this joint is where play usually happens. And I'm not a ball joint fan, but every vehicle comes with them factory. It's just a really inexpensive way to do a movable joint. For racing, we would pretty much never run that. We're always gonna run a uniball and spacers and double shear it, and I'll show you some of that stuff on the workbench over here when we get to it. But now that we've kind of covered everything in the front, one easy trick that you can use when you're doing this is with two people, have somebody shake the tire, and you're like, hey, I feel that it's loose. Don't know where it's loose. Have somebody come over and help you really quick. Mitch, give me the finger test on the front of this, would you? So, Josh, if you show this direction, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna shake this back and forth. Mitch is gonna put his finger on different things. So let's do tie rod. Okay. So let's say we got play, right? Well, an easy way to narrow it down is you put your finger on both parts you think are a problem. You touch the spindle and you touch the joint at the same time. If that's worn out, you will feel it move inside of your finger.
You can grab the hardware too. Sometimes that'll give you a pinpoint too.
Yep, if you're touching hardware and you can feel it moving, that's one way to do it. If it's a hub bearing, then you put your finger on the rotor. Somewhere between, say, the rotor and the caliper, which is hard to do with the wheel on here, but if the rotor is going through the caliper, you would put your finger on both of those parts and shake the wheel and tire vertically. You can feel the bearing movement by doing that. What other tricks have you got, especially in the back with radius rods? The finger test is like golden because you've got 6, 8, 12 joints and you don't know which one it is. It's very easy. Just put your finger on the joint, shake it, and follow every single one, and you'll find the loose one really quick if you're doing it that way. What else can you give us on the front, Mitch? Any other tricks when you're working on this stuff?
Pretty much covered most of it. I mean, good old shake test if you see something loose. It's kind of, I mean, there's really not much to add to that, honestly.
You know what people ask a lot? They ask, how much grease do you put in the wheel bearing? And the answer is 0. You know, there's greaser tools to add grease to wheel bearings. Polaris, I can see when the bearing is brand new, maybe doing 4 or 5 squirts of grease in that. But you can easily over grease it and ruin the bearing too. So you want to keep that to a minimum. On a Polaris bearing, you do 0. You add anything to that, then you're asking for it to fail. You want to keep it in the factory grease position, right? So once you've done it once, you're not going to add more. It doesn't go away and the grease doesn't break down. The bearing's going to fail way before the grease breaks down. So don't use that as a normal thing you're doing in your prep. Back to our list, we've covered everything down to tie rods, rack and pinions, radius rods, hubs, trailing arms, sway bars, CVs, axles, boots. Let's take that bottom part of the list and go over to the workbench where we've laid a few things out for you guys so you can see what we're talking about. On the bench, we've got lower control arms, upper control arms, axles, hubs, upright spindles, trailing arms. So this might be on the a little advanced side for some of you guys. If you've never seen control arms and hubs pulled off of your UTV, then this might be a little Greek to you. But here is a factory lower control arm for a Can-Am X3 laid on top of a race lower arm. So what you want to look at is any of these welds on the factory system. You want to check these and see if there's any cracks. Obviously with it on the vehicle, it's easier when it's off. But you're going to see that this factory system uses bushings, which are removed in this port. What we do is get rid of ball joints and get rid of these bushings. And we go with a uniball, which is a really large joint, stainless steel spacers, and rod end and stainless spacers on the inside. So these do not wear out, they don't fail, they take heavier abuse, but you're going to replace parts faster. Typically on a race prep, we're going to be looking at it every single race. We're looking at all of those parts to see if any of them have excessive play, and then we're going to replace them. Upper arm, here's a factory X3 arm. Factory ball joint, which I've said in the past that I'm not a fan of. Factory bushings, this is actually prepped and ready to go on one of our pre-runners. Here, the race version, completely TIG welded chromoly, big uniball joint, big uniballs on the upper, so none of this stuff is going to rip off on boulder impacts or things you're going to hit during a race. CVs and axles. If you have a UTV that's a play car and you're kind of the average driver, you're probably not going to have to go through any CV and axle prep on a season-to-season basis unless you've torn a boot. And on these CVs and axles, you can see this is the boot I'm talking about. It's very easy to look at when it's on the vehicle. And if it's got a tear in it, you're going to know because there's going to be grease everywhere flying around. It's really dirty, messy, and you're not going to want to do it. Pain in the butt. I hate CV grease. One of my most hated things ever. Molly Lube. She is a bitch. That is for sure. So CVs and axles, pretty much if you're a play car, you're going to relegate that down to boots. If you are really driving hard, or maybe pre-running or just shorter racing, you're probably going to go through the CVs and axles every year. You can do one of two things. You can just tear them apart, re-grease them, take a look at all the balls, inner stars, outer stars, make sure you don't have pitting, and put it back together. Make sure that you mark the axle to the rotation and location on the vehicle. If you take it off, that axle finds a direction that it twists, say left side rear. Engine's pushing it this way, it's twisting in a counterclockwise direction its whole life. If you took that axle and you put it on the right-hand side, it's now going to twist the opposite way. Guarantee you it's broke within 5 miles, even without running it hard. They don't like to go backwards once they've gone one direction. So make sure you mark them and that they stay in the same spots. If you're going to, CVs are not that way. You can keep the CV in any direction. As a matter of fact, we'd run a CV in the race car for 1,000 miles, and the leading edge, all the horsepower is loaded on the front side of some of the ball grooves. We'll take that CV and prep it and run it on the other side. So now it runs on the reverse side, which doesn't have any wear. We can run it another 1,000 miles. You can't do that on an axle. Axles have to stay in the same rotation their whole life and then toss them and get a new one. It's the only way you can do it. That's actually a pretty good piece of information right there. A lot of people don't realize that. They just end up putting axles back on their car and they break and they go, oh, stock axles suck. Not usually the case, honestly. So hubs, hub bearings, spindles, a lot of people call these uprights. So this is a Can-Am factory. We call it a hub, spindle. In this, we've got pins for a uniball location for upper and lower control arm. This is the factory bearing held in with a clip. Now in this particular instance, and in Polaris's and others, the hub bearing and the spindle itself are fairly weak when you race them. When you're doing play car stuff, then typically you're not going to have major failures, but I would suggest that you do another bearing inside these once a year. And again, with a Polaris, maybe a couple squirts of grease, but in a Can-Am, nothing, leave it factory and go for it. Now we do a lot more to ours than that, and I'll get to it. Did you have something cool?
No, we were just, a lot of people still joining, so no real questions right now, so keep going.
Awesome, cool. So here's stock one. One of the reasons that we go through these in the race car pretty quick is because we have to shave them down for different clearances like CV, larger CVs. We might have heard it, so we end up swapping these out quite a bit. Another thing that we did, and no, we do not sell this, you cannot buy this from us, but we make our own stainless steel nut. And what that does is it retains the bearing inside of this spindle and does not use the clip, because these clips are fairly weak and the clips can pop out and then the bearing comes out and your race is over. So we make that for some of our stuff. But if you want to go Big Daddy, then that is this one right here from ZRP. It is a double shear spindle. What that means is, if I can hold this with one hand, probably not. I'll do it this way. Double shear spindle. So what that means is that an arm, lower arm or upper arm, is attached to this single pin. There's nothing holding the top of it. So that means this can bend and flex and move around. With this spindle, it is double sheared, meaning that pin is located on the top and on the bottom. So now this can't bend around. And then you have zero failures with pins and uniballs. What uniballs or ball joints, right? So combine that with a giant uniball and a chromoly arm, then you've got an unbreakable package, and that's typically what we have to run on all racing stuff. Steve?
I have an unbreakable package, but anyways, what uniball manufacturer do you recommend? 21 XRS two-seater.
So there's no uniballs in their factory. So if you've got aftermarket arms that require that, then we run FK on all the uniball stuff that we run. If you've got a Lone Star kit or Cognito kit, then they're going to have uniball and they're going to have rod end locations. You're going to run FK on everything. Sizes vary according to the manufacturer of arms. Bigger is better, always. Bigger the rod end, bigger the uniball, the longer it lasts. Steve, do you know anything about bigger is better?
I do. Bigger is better. And who has the largest rod ends on the market, Justin?
Excellent question, Steve. Funny that you should ask.
Oh, shameless
plug.
Bam.
Bam. So, radius rods in stock here, Shock Therapy. Now, on radius rod kits, typical radius rod kits, whether they're long travel or standard width, it doesn't matter. They're going to run a 5/8 uniball or 5/8 rod end. We run 3/4, means that is much bigger all the way around, and that translates to two things for you. One, much stronger. Two, lasts longer and does not squeak. When you've got radius rods that you threw on there and 200 miles in, they're squeaking like hell, that's a very low quality rod end, or a very small one, or both is causing that problem. So if you want the biggest rod ends in the industry, Steve, where do they go?
www.shocktherapyusa.com.
There it is. Trailing arms from radius rods, spindles, hubs, brakes. Actually, one more thing. If you're looking at a bearing and wondering if it's good or bad, Typically, you're going to know that when it's on the car and you give the tire the shake test. You're going to feel the play in it. But another way that you know that if it's bad, this is a drive flange, sits right inside that bearing, is if the bearing is going bad, you'll see wear on this drive plate where it's inside that bearing, because the bearing race starts to spin on the drive flange and it galls up that surface. That's telling you that bearing's about to go. So one tricky way you can find that out without actually, if you pulled it off without checking the tire or shaking the tire first. Steve.
Jason Close said, you keep saying no grease in Can-Am bearings. What if I'm in water and mud quite often? Wouldn't grease be better in the bearing than muddy water?
Well, yeah, I mean, grease is always better than water and mud for sure. But one thing to consider if you take a look at this factory bearing is it does have a waterproof seal on it. And the only way this seal is broken is if you over grease the bearing and it pushes the seal out. So getting water and mud inside this bearing, pretty tough to do with a seal like that. I would rather see you replace the bearing on a routine basis in your prep that we're talking about than grease the bearing, forcing grease, possible water and mud out of it to try and fix the problem, because then you're over greasing it, and if you drive fast in any way, shape, or form, it'll overheat and smoke the bearing. Trust me, too much grease causes temperature, fails bearings. We've done this. We know what we're talking about there. But if you're a mud guy and all you're doing is 20 mile an hour and less, you can grease the hell out of the bearings, because the bearing's never going to get hot with the driving you're doing. So there's a little give and take with that answer to your question.
So
Make
too
sense?
much grease and it'll fall off?
Yeah, absolutely. In our driving and in our racing and in our terrain, too much grease, it will fall off. In your terrain, if you're driving 20 mile an hour and less, maybe not. You can probably grease it and let it fly. But for us, we would replace the bearing no matter what and not grease it. Mitch.
First name, I'm going to probably butcher it, but McVeigh wants to know, what do you guys think of the NXT level arms where the shock mounts to the lower control arm?
So I don't have any experience with NXT. I can't tell you an opinion on that, but I am a fan of mounting shocks to the lower control arm, similar to what Holtz had built for race cars for 4 Parts, Scanlon, a few others race that system, and I think that that's awesome. But like the new Polaris Pro R is a lower control arm shock mounted system. Geometry wise it's better, strength wise it's better, because now you have the strongest arm on the car is also the one that can hit rocks, so now you're covering 2 birds with 1 stone. Geometry and angle of the shock is better when you do that. If you took the shock on an upper control arm mount and stood it up where it wants to be, then it's in your face, can't see. Lower control arm mount, much better. So I like all of that, but when it comes to racing, most of the series are outlawing that coming next year. Best in Desert, Score, a few others. So you're not going to see any lower control arm mounted stuff unless it came that way factory. But I'm a fan. Mitch.
So with the Pro R stuff, Keaton Bircham wants to know, is the new Pro R going to be harder to fix on the trail? For example, broken axle looks like it could damage the shock mount if it hits hard enough.
You know, you got a point, and yeah, if you snap an axle, it'll probably bounce off that lower loop a little bit. But from what I have seen, the lower loop is fairly strong, and it'll kind of act like a drive shaft loop underneath the back of a truck. It'll give that axle a place to be instead of bouncing around and taking out trannies and taking out upper arm parts and maybe getting into the ball joint or into something else in the spindle. It'll probably be contained. I don't think it's going to break it. To get that lower shock piece off is only 1 bolt. So I don't think you're going to gain much time in replacing axles. You're talking another 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the most. So I don't think it's that big a deal. I'd rather see the shock mounted to the lower arm and pay the price for an extra 5 minutes, honestly. Steve.
I got nothing.
You got
said
nothing?
trannies and I got all sides.
That's what I thought. You had a big smile on your face.
You said trannies and I got all excited.
So back to trailing arm. This is an X3 trailing arm, factory. These are okay if you're playing, but if you're going to rip it hard, then you can fold these right at the shock mount. You know, this will fold and bend, and the arm will do one of these. Or if you have giant mistake, big jump landing that you weren't ready for from 10 feet up and just wad the rear corner into something, you can bend them. There is box kits for these. There's box-in kits for all Polaris stuff too. And for instance, like Phil Blurton races a stock rear arm. It just has extra gusseting in it for the abuse. We run an aftermarket arm. This is a geyser arm, full box. Internally, if you look at some of the weld lines on here, you can see that there's structure inside this arm. Basically a truss network internally, makes it extremely strong. And you see it's also got a uniball, a giant uniball on the front, as opposed to a small factory bushing joint on the front of a factory arm. And these are only about 2 pounds heavier than the factory arm is boxed. So because of the weight not being very much and the strength being much, much higher, we run that arm and arm assembly on all of our race car stuff for sure. If you guys have any questions, hit it now. Otherwise, I'm gonna go to the big prep stuff when you have time to get deep into your chassis. Steve.
It is an off-topic question, but it was before. What oil do you use for an XP1000 non-turbo?
Well,
what oil would you use?
We run Z-Max oil in all of our race car assemblies and all of our pre-runners. If you don't have a source for any Z-Max close, then a good substitute would be a Mobil 1 semi-synthetic or full synthetic. Personally, that's what we would run if we had no options and we're out of Z-Max. Smitch.
Another off-topic one.
Yeah.
But, Caesar wants to know, on the YXZ, I added the shock tower, which changed the shock geometry. I have your springs. Do I need to change any settings?
You want to set your ride height again. More than likely, when that's stood up outward, it's probably moved outward. Then you're going to have, the shock's going to have more leverage against the car and suspension, which means it could sit higher. It means it won't bottom out as much, but it also means that it might be a little stiffer in the chop and the chatter. So check your ride heights, lower it a little bit if you need to, and go ahead and send it. If it rides like crap, then give us a call and you probably have to change spring rates. Steve.
Little off topic too, but Richard Bruzas said, greetings from Hungary. I know you're using OEM brakes with large diameter discs and different pads. What is your opinion about the Agency Power Big Brake Kit, and what kind of spark plugs do you use?
So spark plug question, we run factory or NGK. There really isn't any other options, and not that we would change. We have 0 spark plug problems, even with big boost. Not in our race car because we're limited to factory stuff, but we have built some big race engine stuff at 400 horsepower on an X3 and 0 issue with the stock plug. It is also the coldest heat range available, and usually on a turbo motor that's what you want, so that's what we run. Brakes. The reason that we run the factory caliper and the factory master with a larger diameter rotor is because all of that stuff is made by Brembo factory OEM division. The engineering in it is amazing. It has the best pedal feel, and we can lock a 35-inch tire up on the asphalt at 60 miles an hour with no issues. We've tried big brake kits, 6-piston caliper stuff, and none of them worked as good at all, like not even close. So I don't think that any of the big brake manufacturers or aftermarket kits that are on the market really have the engineering dialed in like Brembo does, and we just chose to stay that way with a larger diameter rotor for more leverage and then perfect pedal feel. So that's the reason why we run what we run. Nothing against the brake guys that are making these kits at all. We just have not, in our testing, not as good as the factory stuff. Anything else? Nope, nope.
Just statement says it's pro day. What's Can-Am gonna respond with?
Good question.
A lot of people very curious about the Pro R.
Yeah, a lot of people. I do have a lot of Pro R questions, but
So let me let you in on 2 things. 1, I do know that Can-Am has something coming for that. Not going to be soon, and that's all I'm going to tell you. That's number 1. Number 2, that doesn't really mean anything. It's awesome, honestly. The more manufacturers that come out and have model wars, the better for all of us. It really is, except for the price. I heard they're 45 grand and up now, but besides the steep price of some of this stuff, I think it's awesome that they're going to have, OEM wars. We all benefit, right? It's a good thing. 3rd, on the 20th, we will be driving a new Pro R, and we at Polaris's invitation, and we're going to be doing a full unboxing video for you on the 20th on that vehicle. So we will have a ton of details for you guys. It's going to take us a few days to edit it together, so give us, call it 25th, 6, something like that. We're going to have a killer video for you. Hopefully, I'm pretty sure it's going to be the first one out from someone who's actually driven it and be able to show you the details and some of the engineering behind that car. UTV.
Very exciting.
Yeah, somewhere in that. It's going to be bitching.
Yeah.
We're gonna dish it all. Not really. We don't want to piss Polaris off too much. There's probably not much to say negative. The car's pretty bitching, but we're gonna give it everything we got. So tune in for that. Answers a lot of questions on the Pro R, right?
Perfect.
Chassis. Okay, guys, if you've done the simple stuff, right? You've done your oil changes, you've jacked the car up off the ground, you've shaken the tire, you've checked hubs, you've checked arms, bushings, you've gone a little deeper and you've done your CVs and your axles, and you've looked at all of the hub bearings, and you've checked rear arms for cracks and all the basic prep. Then you've got some of the deeper stuff. And that's gonna be, if you can take half the plastics off of your car and take a look at the chassis, then this is gonna be the next step. Don't let me forget, Steve, I need to talk about clutch. Clutch is actually one of the things that we should be talking about earlier, but since I'm on the chassis, let's just go over to it. So this is a factory X3 frame, and everything I'm gonna talk about is not specific to a Can-Am. Every manufacturer has the same spots in the same locations that you need to take a look at and look for cracks or wear. On a Can-Am or a Polaris chassis, one of the spots that's fairly weak is where this whole front end attaches to the floor. In a Polaris, this is going to be a main frame rail going back from here. In a Can-Am, not so much. But if you take a look at this folded material that's in here, right around this area is a weak spot, and right around this back area here is a weak spot. As a matter of fact, after we sandblasted this, we found a crack up here, and this is one of the reasons why we do the prep that we do, because you want to get ahead of that stuff and gusset it accordingly. Another spot, shock mounts, both in Polaris and Can-Am, but on a Can-Am, these have issues right around this area. In a Polaris, they're gonna have issues at the tabs that extend off the tube. Those tend to crack. Another spot you're gonna wanna look at, any trailing arm mounts. So on a Polaris, these tabs right here, where they attach to the chassis, is a common spot for cracking. Also, on a Polaris, these two mounts on this Can-Am would be a rear sway bar mount. On a Polaris, this tube tends to have cracking issues. You wanna make sure that you're staring at that. And anywhere where 5 or 6 tubes tie together, for instance, underneath this cage pad, these spots right here see a lot of flex, especially on Polarises. You wanna make sure that you're looking up into that zone as well. If you take a look at the back of this car, you're gonna see one pretty good crack right here. This is not Can-Am's fault. This is where we actually cut some tubes off the car and added a bunch of chromoly for a rear tire mount. But you can see that's what a crack looks like after you've done some sandblasting. Before that, it's kind of hard to see when the thing's black or powder coated. You really have to look deep. But that kind of time is what you need to take, especially if you're doing any kind of racing between seasons, or every 3 or 4 races, you're gonna be doing crack checks like that. Okay, we do crack checks like this pretty much every race, and that's with a chromoly frame that we've built from scratch. So imagine throwing 5,000 race miles at a factory chassis. What do you think is gonna happen? They've never been designed to do that. This one right here is our original pre-runner from many, many videos ago. It's got over 13,000 miles on that thing, and we look at it routinely. We're replacing ball joints every 1,000 miles just to be ahead of the game and preventative. We're changing hub bearings every pre-run. Doesn't matter if the pre-run was 300 miles or 1,300 miles. We're changing bearings every single time. We're prepping everything on the car. So it's no doubt that you're gonna find some cracks in a chassis that's old. Any questions on chassis stuff? Nope.
Nope.
Boy, you guys are like questionless.
We do have like kind of a statement from Chris Jones. He said, just did your spring kit on my X3 Max. Absolutely love it. Can't wait to do the revalve.
That is a shameless plug. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yep.
For throwing that out there.
There is a question from Mitch, from Richard Noe. It says, what does the number 43 represent on Mitch's arm? Richard Petty Racing? Question mark?
No.
Mitch, throw an arm out there. Let's hear the story.
Out of all of my tattoos, that is the number one that I always get asked about.
Well, that's what everybody can see.
Yeah, no, for sure. I did it. I put it there.
A big Tomac fan, dude?
Yeah, I am. No,
I'm
it's
gonna grab a clutch while you're doing that, Mitch.
last 4 digits of my student ID going through MMI, so kind of just a remember of that. Nothing crazy, nothing cool. I wish there was a cooler story to it, but that's all it is.
Right on.
What about you? Let's get a tattoo story from you, Steve.
I don't really have many. Just misspelled a couple. No, I'm just kidding. Just one. Just one. I've only misspelled one.
One letter.
Steve, you don't have any regrets?
Nope. Just
No-
forever,
no regrets?
Just forever grateful.
I thought you had regrets.
No.
All right, sorry for banging around, making noise on that. But last thing that we want to talk about, which might have been one of the first things that we should have talked about, is clutch. Now, if you got a Honda and or a YXZ, you don't have to worry about this, but in either of those, you're going to be looking at the clutch pack and discs in those over time. With everybody else, we're going to be looking at centrifugal clutch assemblies and belts. Right along with the top of the list when it comes to engine oil and filters and things like that, you've got a belt on the clutch you're going to want to change. And depending on how well your clutch assembly works, how much power your car's making, if you flashed it, if you got a big tire, if you're hard on it, you're easy on it, belts are going to last 1,000, 1,500 miles for you. If you're really, really hard on it, then you might only get 200 to 300 miles. But with what we do in racing, if you don't have the clutch dialed in perfect, then don't bother showing up to the race. And when I say dialed in, I mean where it does not develop any heat, gets you the proper RPM range, and lives the whole race. And we're talking about a Baja 1000, that means it has to be floored for 1,000 miles or more. We typically don't have belt problems anymore after years of playing with it. And if you do on a play car constantly have belts breaking, then you have other issues. It is not the belt's fault. You've got clutch problems, and it could be components inside the clutch that are worn out, causing that setup to be inaccurate, developing heat, blowing belts. It could be other pieces of the clutch, the tune not being right, how it engages, causing temperature that fails the belt. But usually belts don't fail on their own. It's always something else that's causing it. So what we get a lot of when it comes to questions is how we keep the belt temp down. It's about the tune being perfect, and it's about having all the parts being new, working right, not worn out. Some of the things that you need to look at, now this is a Can-Am clutch, primary. If this is a Polaris, it would have less pedestals and less weights. But in this assembly, if I was to take it apart, which is pretty quick since I've got it that way, a couple things you want to look at. The surface that the belt rides on, which is called a sheaves, either way, whatever you want to call it. If I took a straight edge to this and you can see low spots underneath it, then this needs to be machined and straightened so you don't have that problem. That's number one. Number two, on the other side of things, inside this weight assembly, if I can pull this apart, do this equal, there we go. Inside this weight assembly are multiple bearings. You've also got pivots that these weights are riding on. These can also wear out, causing weights to go sideways. When weights go sideways, this whole assembly does not work very well. These rollers up on the end need to have zero load. Again, when you've got one or two of these worn out, this whole thing tries to come out cockeyed and not work properly, which causes temperature and wears out belts or breaks them immediately. All these components have to work together. In the secondary, you have the same issue. You want to make sure that all these surfaces are perfectly straight. You can only check it with a straight edge and a flashlight. Also, there's bearings inside here as well. And this helix, you can see these rollers below here. These rollers can get flat spots in them, or they can break. And if you have that as a problem, this assembly will not expand and cycle correctly, which you'll get hard spots in it. When it locks up for a second, then you get temperature. You blow belts. So typically, when you have belt problems, you've got a clutch problem. You don't have a belt problem. You want to make sure that all the components in the clutch are working fine. So on a routine basis, blow it out. No dust, no dirt, every single trip. Every couple trips, take it apart or have somebody look at all the parts and make sure that you don't have anything worn out. If you have belt temps that you didn't have before, then you better get into that clutch right away. Steve.
So Justin, if you don't blow it, it'll fall off.
That's right. Blow it out on a routine basis, Steve.
Yes.
Otherwise, you will lose it. Mitch.
It'll fall off.
It'll fall off.
It'll fall off.
Steve0714 is having an issue with his clutch. He says, when I put it to stock, the secondary, it has no wobble, but when I put the STM on it, it wobbles. It's an OG Maverick Turbo.
Oh boy.
Sounds like you have an STM problem. No? Sounds pretty simple to me. So, just because it's an STM doesn't mean it's perfect. It could be out of balance, or it could be machined inaccurately, or it could be a part that you have to install on the STM that's not right. But if stock is good and STM's not, then you have a problem with that specific unit. I will be looking at that STM secondary. Mr. Steve.
Robert Stout said, have you been able to get a P clutch for testing? Thoughts on durability?
Oh, that is an excellent question that I am not allowed to answer. Sorry. But the answer isn't no.
Stoked to shred.
No,
Sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
You go ahead.
Nope,
No,
go
we
ahead.
raised hands at the same time. You just saw me because I went more obnoxious. So
Yes,
you
you
ahead,
did.
Mitchie. You first.
He's way more flamboyant than you, Mitch.
All right. Stoked to shred. Seeing the X-Travel car in the background makes me question your thoughts on the suspension design, likes, concerns, excited to see what they do for the store car.
Yes, all of the above. I am excited. It's very cool, and we will show you that here real quick. Steve, before we walk over to the X-Travel car?
So there's a statement and a question, but I will just read the question. It says, do you recommend ZRP brace tower for Can-Am X3? What is the difference between the TMW shock tower or the ZRP or the Assault? Is there a difference between all the different brands? Which one would you recommend, Justin?
So having not run every single one of them, I am a bad person to compare the two against each other. I won't do that. But we have run Lone Star, we've run Geyser, and we have run S3. All of them have worked out great, but if you really want the best stability, you should be welding it on. The bolt-on kits have some flex to them, and personally, I would bolt the sucker on and then I would weld it as well and paint it. That's probably the best in my book. But those are the three we have experience with, and they're all great. Mitch?
Two clutch questions. Yes. Wow. Best way to clean the clutch, and which clutch weights or kit would you recommend?
Cleaning the clutch is going to be high pressure air with a small tip, and Steve knows all about small tip and blowing.
Okay. Yeah.
So blow it out extensively, rotate it a few times, turn it over with the engine, blow it out, not when it's running obviously, but spin it around and blow it out. Get all the dust out. That's number one. Number two, if you can take it apart, then that's the best. You're gonna have to be able to see some of these parts when they're worn out. Clutch weight kits. Everybody has a really badass kit, honestly. You've got KWI, you've got Evo, and a few others. That's what I would suggest. Who else? I'm sorry, I'm not mentioning everybody that's out there, but when it comes to weights and springs, there's a lot to talk to. I would use whoever you have the best communication with. So give them a call, talk to Chris, talk to the guys at Evo, and whoever you like the best, use them. We have used them all, and we currently use them all. A lot of our clutches have multitude of parts in there from multiple manufacturers. So, X-Travel, maybe we leave with that.
Yep.
Josh. So to answer, I didn't catch his name on the X-Travel question, but
Stoked to shred, I believe it was.
Stoked to shred. So X-Travel, and this is kind of off subject, you guys are not talking about prep anymore, but it is front suspension. X-Travel's got a new front suspension design. It's pretty badass. In general, the shortest explanation I can give you is that it takes all loads off of the steering, off the tie rod, off the steering box, and out of your hands that the front tires will see when it goes through rough terrain. So normally you'd get it back in the wheel, and the power steering has to do the job of stopping that, assuming you have the right wheel offset and all the geometry is right. With an X-Travel kit, you can pretty much remove the power steering and you can drive it with 2 fingers through the rough, and none of that translates through the steering. Hard to explain. I'm not going to draw it out. And maybe in the future we'll do a full episode on how this works, but Josh, if you can show over here in this spindle, looking this way, keeping some light on it, take a look at that spindle assembly. You've got dual upper joints. It's not a single upper ball joint. You have dual lowers. You do not have a single lower ball joint. You have 2. by doing this, and stay right there, Josh, I'm gonna turn it. By doing this, watch all the arms pivot. The upper and lower arms are not one piece. They are multiple links, basically 4 links. By doing this geometry, that removes all steering loads. And all of the steering loads that normally would go into the steering wheel and power steering are translated into the arm joints and mounts. So for racing, this is badass for a couple reasons. Number one, you don't have to turn the power up on the power steering to stop those loads from getting to the steering wheel. You don't usually have very much power in a race car. You need an alternator, so it stops you from having to run an alternator to power a bigger power steering unit. And finally, if you don't have loads in the wheel, then you're not getting tired and you can drive to your fullest potential all race long as fast as you can without having to slow down because your arms are asleep. So excellent idea. We're going to be hearing a lot from those guys. A lot of the race teams are considering it, and we are working through all of it and doing some testing with them right now. We're excited to do that. Mitch, got anything cool?
One random kind of question. Ramp Rat said, I've got gold label walkers on my Turbo S. I was adding a couple clicks of adjustment in the front shocks in the middle of a ride. He blistered his finger on the knob. He wants to know, is this too hot?
Nope. So the operating temperature range on shocks is going to be between 140 and 280 degrees. Water boils just around 200 and change. So the fact you burnt your fingers means that it's probably around 200 and something degrees. I wouldn't worry about that at all. It's right in the range that we want it to be. A lot of people get overly concerned when they touch the shock and it's hot. It is not too hot unless you touch it and you pull your hand off and all of your skin is left on the shock. It has to be that bad, where our gold stickers are melting off of the shock for it to be too hot. Don't worry about it at all. Next time, use a rag, cold rag when you're adjusting it, or let it sit a little bit longer. The adjusters on a walker are easier to turn when it's not hot. Just a heads up, having done it.
More Pro R questions.
Shoot, go for it. I'll answer them if I know them.
Razor Life wants to know specifically for you, is his Pro R shocks ready yet?
We will probably have them ready before anybody else does. How's that? But I did hear a little birdie tell me that there's not going to be very many of those available at first. So you may not see very many of these things floating around until January.
Off-road Life Razor, you kind of went over it, but any thoughts on the info given on the new Razor?
Yeah, we're going to have a whole lot more for you after the 20th. Tune in the week after the 20th. Josh is going to work the weekend to get that video together, so it's going to be quick. Steve?
Shout out from Keith Smith. He was in here with a Smart Shock car with 6-inch portals and 37-inch tires, and he said it's badass.
I remember that car. I'm glad he likes it.
Too. And then Paul Andrew Massaro said, I am getting the X3 RC 64-inch turbo RR. How long will it take to get into your shop after I receive it in January for shock therapy? And also, can you recommend a good shop in Arizona area that can do shock tower brace and a French bracelet kit install before I bring it to your shop? What the hell is a French bracelet?
Steve, can you guess what that is?
It sounds sexual and I'm kind of into it, but I have no idea what a French bracelet is. But if you call into the shop, you might be able to call in and see if you can set an appointment. I think we're booked out till mid-December right now.
I think we're 6 weeks out. We were just talking about that earlier. We're 6 weeks out on dropping a car off. We're 4 weeks out on dropping shocks off. I would suggest this: if you know exactly when you're getting your car, for instance, the first week in January, then call us and set up an appointment for the second or third week in January right now. And that way, when you get your car, you're only a week away. That would be the best thing you can do.
Oh,
see what I did there?
Yeah, but it's not a French bracelet kit. It's a shock tower and gusset.
Gusset
that
kit.
damn autocorrect.
So a good shop in town. There's a lot to choose from. Side-by-side addicts, TMW, yes, Jeffrey's Performance, Geyser Performance, UTV Stereo I think might be installing. There's just a few to start. That doesn't mean that they're the only ones, man. There's a lot here that do a great job. But book your appointment now for a week or two after you get your car. Yeah, there's no, we don't charge anything for skipping appointments if you give us some heads up about 10 days. Then you can reschedule. Cool? All right. sounds like we are done. There's our prep. There's our list. You guys shoot back to this. Remember, there's clutch on this list as well. I forgot to write it down. Apologize. Clutch is number 2 or 3 on the list for sure. Run through this stuff before your seasons as much as you possibly can. It will prevent all of your stuff from falling the hell off. Steve, with that, you want to take it out of here?
We'll take it out of here, guys. If you are looking to buy anything from us, please visit our website at www.shocktherapyusa.com. Or if you're trying to book an appointment, please call in 623-217-4959.